inspiring. Pauline and Sean have a nice presentation. And then following that, Bob Coster is going to discuss communications and all that kind of thing through the Revolutionary War. As everybody knows, we've been going chronologically mostly through battles and everything. We're going to continue to do that, but as we go, we're going to do little things like this throughout. And there's several of you who have volunteered to do some sessions. We have a nice one coming up, June 9th, with Mark. Mark is here. He's not here, but him and his wife are going to be doing one. He's going to set up a tent outside, one of the old tents that they used to have back in the day. Talk about colonial life. Real quick, before we get started, on June 2nd, we're going to do, instead of, in lieu of the session, we're going to see Revolutionary America, one of two big movies we're all going to want to see. Second one being Young Washington. That comes out actually on the 4th. But Revolutionary America is by Angel Studios, which is a good operation. You're going to be non-political, very historical-based presentation. We are going, right now there's a bunch of seats. Sean's going to go over tomorrow and purchase probably 20 of them. If you want to go there, see Sean before the end of the night.
Where's that, Glenn?
It's going to be at Regal, and it's $20. It's about 18 something plus tax. So just give him $20, or just tell him you'll pay him next week and you run on the list. We're only going to have 18 to 20 seats. And there's several people here that I know are going, so with that, are there any questions about the next few weeks before Paulie gets going? No? All right, thank you. Paulie Samuel, everybody.
And we left off on the chronological situation with Battle of Princeton, right? That was the last thing.
Yeah, so Brandywine, fall of Philadelphia is next week.
All right, well, thank you guys for having me here. I recognize some of you, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm Paulie. I work here at Buffalo Cigars with the guys. And Ron and Sean asked me to talk a little bit about spying and espionage in the Revolutionary War, and I'm pleased to do that. So we'll dig right in.
Oh, wait, Paul. Sorry, everybody. You got me in the front.
Everybody? Thank you for putting that up, Paul. Everybody, please stand.
Do it for the hockey game. We must shoot
Got the flag over there or here.
Your flag up here or over there. Hats off. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
By the way, we got a few Canadians that came in tonight just for this lecture. You guys have a pledge? No?
Yeah, $500.
They got a horrible hockey team.
Canadians, they cheat. You know that. The refs are cheating. Doing anything to get Montreal in.
The whip wasn't
We
here.
appreciate you coming though, thanks.
So before I studied up for this little presentation here, I didn't know a whole lot about spying efforts in the Revolutionary War. I had read a few accounts in some of the books I've read, not about espionage, but they were just a few accounts in the books. And then I watched the series called Turn. Many of you probably have heard of it. Maybe a lot of you have seen it. It's an excellent series. It's actually on Netflix, I believe, is the network right now. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend you have a look at it. But I was studying for this. I learned a lot about it, and there were a lot of things that surprised me in it. And hopefully, you'll find some things tonight that surprise you. That's my hope, anyways. So, the Revolutionary War began and ended with espionage, for sure, and there was a whole hell of a lot of it in between as well. First example is Margaret Kimball Gage. She was the American wife of British General Thomas Gage, and she is widely thought to have given critical intelligence to Joseph Warren ahead of the Brits marching on Concord through Lexington. They were trying to. We talked about that many weeks ago, so I won't belabor it. But they were trying to get to Concord to destroy our weapons, gunpowder, and ammunition, and as well they were trying to get a few of the leaders of the Patriot effort. So John Hancock and Sam Adams in particular, and she provided critical intelligence that allowed us to be prepared for it. And the Brits expected it to be a surprise, and sure wasn't that. That was our first very decisive victory. It was extremely embarrassing, to say the least, for the British Army, the strongest military in the world at the time. So that's how our war started. We had the intelligence, they didn't. And that's going to be a common theme tonight. We had the intelligence and they didn't. And then at the end of the war, a guy named Jimmy Armistead, he was an enslaved black man, and he infiltrated Cornwallis's camp around Yorktown. He actually volunteered to join the Patriot effort back in 1781, and he asked his owner if he could join the effort, and he allowed him to. So he went to the Patriots around Yorktown and joined. And Marquis de Lafayette, I say that right, Justin? He brought him in, and he put him deep undercover behind enemy lines. And he posed as James Armistead posed as a runaway slave, and Cornwallis brought him in as his personal servant. And because he was around all of the leadership of the British Army down there, he was able to get a lot of great intelligence and pass it along to our guys, Marquis de Lafayette in particular, and that was critical to our siege at Yorktown and ultimately the defeat or the surrender of the British for the war. So it was really incredible. In fact, when they were signing the surrender, Cornwallis, Washington, and Lafayette were there. Washington and Lafayette had James Armistead standing right beside them. And Cornwallis saw him, and he shook his head and said, "I've been had." So he knew. So again, we had the intelligence, they did. And you'll understand how just amazing all of this is as we continue to go on. So we're going to talk tonight about the important role of espionage and spycraft in our victory in this war. And we're going to talk about who, what, where, when, why, and how tonight. So just a little bit of background, what is spying and espionage? The covert practice of gathering secret political, military, or commercial intelligence, typically to gain an advantage, sorry, a little typo there, an advantage over an opponent or adversary. So spying and espionage is important in any competitive situation. As an example, we all remember Spygate, right? In the NFL, the Patriots certainly thought that they would get an advantage over their opponents by spying on teams and cracking their codes. So it's illegal, and we all know that the damages can be so significant that means that the punishment is also extremely severe. And we know several cases where spies that were caught were punished by hanging and of course, death. So, and as you, by studying on this subject, and hopefully you'll see as we move along, the folks that engaged in espionage for us were as brave as the soldiers who fought on the battlefields and bled for us, and without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, they risked every bit as much, no question about it. And it wasn't all professional spies. It was normal people like you and I, shopkeepers, farmers, housewives, slaves, etc. Tons and tons of people were involved in it. So, okay, so spying and intelligence gathering included gathering intelligence, of course, military plans, strategies, troop movement, numbers, the strength, firepower, etc. Counterintelligence, detecting, disrupting, and neutralizing espionage on the part of our opponent, and that included deceiving and exploiting enemy spies. And that, of course, included misinformation. George Washington was an expert at this, amazingly. In many cases, we would spread misinformation to deceive the Brits, and they fell for it, and it helped us tremendously. On the flip side, we also had an effort, we're going to talk more about this too, of detecting misinformation and deception on the part of the British military as well. And of course, the spying and intelligence gathering was both domestic and foreign. So the domestic stuff was a lot about boots on the ground, figuring out day-to-day tactical stuff that was happening, and that included formal guys that were in the spy rings that we'll talk about, as well as just ordinary, everyday civilians. Everywhere across the colonies, every town, every colony, there were civilians engaging in this. Anywhere that the British were, we had spies. And then it also included foreign stuff. We'll talk about this too. Ben Franklin was a founder of the Committee for Secret Correspondence, an amazing outfit. And that was, all of their efforts were overseas, building support from European countries. And part of it included getting foreign intelligence from the Brits on what they were doing here. We'll talk more about that. Big question, did we need espionage in our fight for independence? Well, George Washington, for one, was keenly aware of the necessity of espionage in our effort to win the war. In fact, as a really young guy, he must have been about 21 at the time, in 1756, he remarked, "There is nothing more necessary than good intelligence to frustrate a designing enemy, and nothing that requires greater pains to obtain." So he was very keenly aware. Then in early 77, very beginning of the war, he wrote to Colonel Elisha Dayton, who was a spy for him. He was loosely connected with the Mercero spy ring. He remarked to Elisha Dayton, "The necessity of procuring good intelligence is apparent and need not be further urged." So we knew how important it was. The British also knew how important it was. In fact, after the war was over, one of their intelligence officers, George Beckwith, remarked, "George Washington didn't outfight us, he simply outspied us." So that's a clear indication that everyone recognized that we had good intelligence and the Brits oftentimes didn't. And the reason that it was necessary, we were the ultimate underdog. I mean, we were outmanned, outgunned, outfinanced, outexperienced. I mean, in almost every way that you could measure it, the Brits were far superior to us. So the critical way that we could even the scales was through good intelligence, and we used it. Who were our spies? We had formal and informal stuff. We had spy networks like the Culper, just a couple of examples here. The Culper spy network, which we'll talk about, and Sean's going to talk in depth. I just breeze over it. Sean's going to talk a lot more about it. They were the most well-known formal spy network that we had. They operated out of New York City, where the British had their headquarters from '76 till the end of the war. And then the Mercer Road Network, they preceded the Culper ring, and they operated out of Staten Island, between Staten Island and Brunswick, New Jersey. And then the Committee on Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies. George Washington put John Jay in charge of that one, and that was counterintelligence. They operated out of New York, and all they did was try and detect and disrupt the deceptions from the British. So the informal stuff was all of the civilians that were involved, and there were tons and tons of them. And if you think about it, the Portering Act required the colonials to house the British soldiers and the officers alike. So they were in close contact with them all the time, every day. And a lot of them had loose lips, of course, and our friendly colonials were able to get a lot of intelligence that way, and they would deliver it. Incredible. So a great example of that, Hercules Mulligan. He actually fought in the New York battles, but then when Washington retreated out of New York, he went back to his tailor shop. He was a tailor in New York City, and a reputable one. So a lot of the British soldiers and the officers went to him for their uniforms and their clothing, and he would ask clever questions to try and get information out of them. And he delivered the information via his slave, whose name was Cato. And he twice saved, with his information, with his intelligence, he twice saved George Washington's life. And one time, Washington was going from New York City to Rhode Island, and he caught an officer came in a rush. He needed to get his uniform cleaned up or tailored, and he let loose that they were going to intercept George Washington on the route. And Hercules got message to George Washington, and he changed his route, saved his life. So really an incredible guy. So now we know him better for what he did for the cause of liberty for us than for the what he did in the game of golf. There's a picture of Hercules Mulligan, if you were wondering. Okay, we'll go through a little bit of chronology, how the spine kind of developed for us, because remember, we had no one, including George Washington, that had any experience with spying and espionage, none, or covert activity, zero. So it was absolutely build the plane in the air, for sure. And there were a lot of bumps in the road in the beginning. So in '75, November of '75, which was after Bunker Hill, of course, after Lexington Concord, but before the Declaration, the Continental Congress recognized the need to solicit the help of foreign countries from Europe. And those countries that we talked about, I won't belabor it, they were very willing to do so because they hated Britain. I mean, they were the bully, right? So they were eager to support us, but they kind of tempered their eagerness because they weren't sure whether we were going to be able to do it or not. in the beginning. So Ben Franklin was the founder of this committee. It was called the Committee of Secret Correspondence. About a year and a half later, it was renamed Committee for Foreign Affairs, and their directive was secure foreign support for our revolution, and they did just that, particularly with France and Spain. And as we know, we were able to get military help, naval help, a lot of supplies, and most importantly for this, we got a lot of great intelligence from them as well, from Britain. And then in June, excuse me, in June 1776, George Washington created the Committee on Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies, put John Jay at the head of that, and their directive was to close the regular channels of intelligence from the city. So it was a big counterintelligence effort to detect deceptions from the Brits and disrupt them. So, and they were effective at that. They operated mainly out of New York because the British headquarters was in New York. After a few of our early defeats, George Washington had a heightened awareness of the need for really good intelligence, and he knew we needed better intelligence that we had already. So he turned to a pal of his, Lieutenant Tommy Knowlton from Connecticut. He wanted a group of irregular soldiers that could carry out special missions, covert activities, scouting, reconnaissance, intelligence, all behind enemy lines. So we had Thomas Knowlton, who was a soldier, recruit 130 guys from all around New England. He did it quickly, and they were very skilled soldiers, undoubtedly. They fought extremely valiantly, but they were weak on covert activities. They had zero experience. So in the Battle of Harlem Heights, this group, I won't go into it, I wish I could, because it's really impressive stuff, the things they did in that battle. Of course, it was a losing battle, as we know, but Knowlton was killed in action in that battle. So just a couple months after forming this unit, the leader was killed in action, unfortunately. And then 1 week after that, we all know Nathan Hale, right? He was part of Knowlton's Rangers, believe it or not, and he was captured for spying, and he was hanged. He was captured by Robert Rogers, who was the most well-known spy for British. He was a mercenary as well. And Robert Rogers tricked him in a conversation in a pub one night. Because of Nathan Hale's inexperience, he fell for the trap and he was caught. But he went out saying, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country." So quite a patriot. So Knowlton's Rangers on paper looked like an abject failure, but in reality, it was the beginning of special forces for America, without question. And I'll hammer that point home at the very end here. It was the beginning of Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, etc. So in all of this, George Washington is learning, just like he did throughout this war in so many ways. He learned his lessons, and he changed. He made good judgments, and he changed his tactics. And there's a picture of Tommy Knowlton there, in case you were wondering what he looked like.
Well, nonchalant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from 76 to 78, our espionage activities were very decentralized. It was really a lot of individuals that were loosely connected. There really wasn't a lot of formal spying activities going on. And one of the things, but George Washington wanted to correct that. So he did many things to correct it. I have a couple of examples here. He put a fellow named James Lovell, who was part of the committee for secret correspondence that was headed up by Ben Franklin, remember? He put him in charge of developing sophisticated codes and cipher systems. And from that point on, the spies used those codes and cipher systems extremely well. Then James Jay, who was the brother of John Jay, he set up a lab for him and asked him to create invisible ink that they could use as well. He did that in very short order. So in '76, he formed the Mercer spy ring. Joshua Mercer, who was from Staten Island, he was a businessman and he built the first stagecoach line between New York City and Philadelphia. Successful guy. He recruited him to put together a ring that would be able to, he had a lot of contacts in New York, so he was able to get a lot of information and pass it to the military. Him, his brothers, a couple of his sons, and a few other guys were involved in that. And they were very successful. Their major accomplishment was related to George Washington's escape from New York. Remember, we suffered devastating losses in the battles around New York, and we were retreating. We got to the Delaware River, and we had to cross. You remember, I won't go into it, but we talked about it. That miraculously, they were able to cross the Delaware River at night under a dense, incredible dense fog. But the Britons they actually anticipated us doing that, and they set several boats across the other side of the Delaware, the New Jersey side, so that their guys could intercept us when we did it. Well, Mercereau found out about it ahead of time, had his fellas go down there, and they destroyed the boats or let them go down the river, so they weren't there for the Brits to intercept us. So it's really another extremely fortunate circumstance. So then in '78, the Culper spy ring was formed. George Washington asked Major Ben Talmadge to put together a ring that was going to operate out of New York City. And they called themselves the Culper spy ring. By far the most famous spy ring. Sean will talk a lot more about some of the things that they did for sure. None of these spies were ever caught, which is pretty amazing, especially for the volume of great intelligence that they were able to get and pass along. They used all of the sophisticated ciphers, the invisible ink, code names, dead drops, etc. Pretty impressive group. Some of their accomplishments, they found out about Major Andre, who was the guy that the Brits put in charge of spying in the colonies, and Benedict Arnold. They captured both of them, and they thwarted their effort to take over West Point. They also foiled the attempt by the Brits to intercept the French outfit in Newport, Rhode Island when they first arrived. I'm going to talk in detail about that in a minute. And then they also captured Benjamin Church, who was a traitor, first Surgeon General for us, and a leader in the Sons of Liberty, believe it or not. But he was actually working against us from very early in the war. So in '79, then I mentioned Major John Andre. He was appointed the head of the British Secret Service in the colonies. He was captured and hung as a spy by the Patriots, and that was a joint effort by Mercereau gang and the Culper spy ring. And his biggest achievement in the colonies was turning Benedict Arnold against us. And they had, Benedict Arnold was in charge of West Point at the time, and he was planning on handing West Point over to Major Andre and the Brits. Okay, so just sort of leading up to the conclusion here, I want to talk about a couple of examples of espionage in our war here. And this one, I think, was very interesting. It gives you an idea of the breadth and the width and the depth of the spy efforts for the Americans. So the Brits planned to, we all know that the French were joining the party, right? They were sending over 6,000 French soldiers for us. I'm not 100% sure of this, but I've read 45 to 50 ships with them to carry all the people and all the support and the ammunition, guns, etc. They arrived at Newport, Rhode Island on July 10th, 1780 rather. So remember that date, okay? And the Brits knew they were coming. And they expected to attack the French before they were able to get settled. Their idea was, we're going to get them before they're prepared, and we'll knock them out of the war before they even get started, and then that will end the war for us because the Americans won't be able to withstand fighting us. And they're probably right. If they were able to do that, they probably would have won the war. But we're going to learn what happened after that. So on July 10th, the day that the French arrived, George Washington solicited intelligence from the Culper spy ring. He went to his main guy that we learned about, Benjamin Talmadge, and he said, hey, we need intelligence on the Brits and what they're doing. Are they going to make a move on the French? So Talmadge goes to his guy, Caleb Brewster, who was from Setauket, Long Island. And Caleb Brewster goes to Abraham Woodall, who was a farmer in Setauket. And he went immediately then to Robert Townsend. Robert Townsend was a shopkeeper in New York City. And he dealt a lot of the officers and so forth came in to his shop, and he knew a lot of people in New York. He was able to get very good, credible intelligence, and he wrote a letter to Hamilton and Washington. He sent it first to Hamilton in New Jersey. I'm drawing a blank on the town where their headquarters were at that time. Can't think of it. It'll be on the next slide though. And it got to Hamilton on 7/21. So you can see already this has taken 11 days before it got to Hamilton. Hamilton immediately sent the letter on to Lafayette and George Washington. And George Washington wasn't there at the time, but he came back a day or two later. So it's 14 to 15 days go by before they're able to act on it. So things, in a lot of ways, it's amazing how quickly things happen back then. But you know, in today's age, it seems like an incredibly long time, right? They didn't have cell phones, obviously, or email. So 14 to 15 days go by. Now, in the meantime, on July 24th, General Heath, he was responsible for Rhode Island outfit for the Americans. He received intel on British movements. Now, he didn't receive it first from the Culper spy ring, as is widely reported. First, he got word from a fellow named Colonel Samuel Webb. And this was on the afternoon of July 24th. Okay. Samuel Webb was a paroled prisoner. He was ordered to stay at his house. He was kind of house arrest, so to speak, in his home in Connecticut. But he had heard that the French arrived in Rhode Island, and he decided to grab a couple of his pals, and they were going to take a Connecticut sloop over to Rhode Island just to see the spectacle that was going on with the French arriving. He does that, and he stops in a town in Connecticut and runs into a fellow named Clark Pratt. Clark Pratt gave him intelligence that Britain was going to attack from Long Island. They were going to attack the French at Newport, Rhode Island. So he immediately gets in his continental sloop. And remember, this guy is a paroled prisoner, and he's got to sail that ship through enemy water, so to speak. He had to wind his way through British ships to get there. So it was just tremendous risk that he took, and he was obviously violating his parole. But he got the message to General Heath on the afternoon of 7/24. Then, later on that day, in the evening of 7/24, General Heath also got word from a fellow named Colonel Henry Babcock. And Babcock received intel from the same guy that Clark Pratt received the info from. And he had a message delivered by Mr. Whitman, who was his tutor. He carried the message to General Heath in Rhode Island later on on the 24th. And then the third was Robert Townsend's letter from the Culper spy outfit. That was received on midnight of 7/25. So that was the third instance of this, basically the same intel that he received. So now he knows it's real. And then, of course, over the next couple, 2-3 days, more reports came in to General Heath. So you can see how many people were involved and how active it was. And what were the accomplishments of this whole thing? Well, it allowed the Army in Rhode Island to gather regional militia support from other towns around Rhode Island and even other surrounding colonies. Also, obviously, it allowed the French to hurry their preparations and defenses in Rhode Island. With all those people and all the guns, ammunition, etc., it was a huge task just to get all of that off the ships and get set up and make the fortifications. So it took days, even weeks to do that. And a trip like that with that many people, probably close to half of them arrived here very sick. So, and then finally, probably the biggest thing that happened here was George Washington was able to create a diversion. He received word, remember, from Hamilton on 7/21 at Preakness, New Jersey is where it was. That he got the letter from Robert Townsend. And George Washington quickly and immediately created a diversionary attack at Kingsbridge, New York, with some of his men camped west of the Hudson River. And that effectively caused the Brits to not attack. And by the way, I should have said this in the beginning, they planned on attacking, they wanted to catch the French before they got started. They didn't realize that the French had already arrived. But they said, we're going to do it anyways. But after a week, probably about a week, of their troops being camped at Huntington Bay, Long Island, waiting for orders, the orders never came, and they were sitting there in the baking sun, waiting. So this was a tremendous win, and it wasn't a win from military might or bloodshed. It was from espionage. It was tremendous. So what did we learn? Culper Network may not have been the first to deliver the message. Formal spy networks, and casual civilians, patriots, participated in this. It was, like I was saying before, it was ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and a whole lot of them. And it was a paroled prisoner, a slave, a tutor, a farmer, a shopkeeper, and the list goes on and on and on. Just in this one effort, right? Large web of spies actively involved and all at great risk. And then we also are seeing evidence of counterintelligence being actively used, i.e. the diversionary tactics George Washington used. So the second example is Ben Franklin. Maybe one of his, this might be exaggerating a little bit, but maybe one of his finest achievements was a double flag that he pulled on the French and the Brits. So after, excuse me, just a second.
The timeout.
Oh, no.
Okay, here it is. Here it is. All right. Okay, so we won a really big victory at Saratoga that we're probably all fairly familiar with, right? After we had suffered a number of defeats, as we know, leading up to October 1777, and we had a big victory at Saratoga. The British had hoped that that would provide an avenue for us to them to reconcile with us. At the same time, the French feared that it would result in us reconciling with the British, because they didn't want us to do that for a lot of reasons, right? So Franklin decides he's going to play both of them. He pretended to open a dialogue with the Brits for reconciliation, so he drew them in, and then he knew that the French were going to find out about it, and of course they did very quickly, and they, of course, excuse me my French, but they pissed their pants, and they rushed into an alliance with us to support the war effort. So it was just a tremendous kind of double victory for us. And that resulted in, of course, a Treaty of Alliance in February 1778, and that we ended up getting, as we talked about, money, troops, supplies, and of course, intelligence. All right, so here's a little trivia question for you. In 1997, the CIA awarded 3 American patriots as the founding fathers of American intelligence. Can you guys name the 3? We talked about all 3 of them tonight.
Talbot? James J? John J?
Yeah.
Which one?
John J. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Talmadge and Culper.
No.
Ben Franklin?
Ben Franklin, for all of his covert activities, Committee of Correspondence of Foreign Affairs, basically. John Jay for Counterintelligence, Committee on Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies, and then George Washington, who is they call him the spy master, because he orchestrated most, if not all of it. So tremendous honor, posthumous, obviously. All right, and then here's a bet you didn't know. name this fella. He was a financial broker, primary financier of colonial espionage. He raised over $650,000 for Washington. We did not have much of a budget for spying and espionage activities, as you can imagine. We didn't have much of a budget for the war, right? But this guy raised that's a hell of a lot of money. I mean, it's got to be $30-50 million today, and that's incredible. Anybody know who it is? Lee should know this guy. I'm a little disappointed.
He's Jewish and he's
Time Solomon. Solomon. All right, well, listen, thanks for playing along here. Maybe, Sean, you can do your thing, and then I have a video I'd like to play if we have time. It's actually 13 minutes. I thought it was 20. It's 13.
How did Engage's wife get killed with her being the wife of I don't know. You know?
I'm not sure.
And
Yeah.
they send her back, they send her back.
They did send it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though she was American.
Right, okay, I remember you saying that, but that's just crazy that she stayed alive.
So Paulie, all those Talmadge, and then you had that little line to the other guys, were they all members of the Culper?
Yeah.
Randy,
Yeah,
shopkeeper?
It was a Culper spy outfit.
Which is primarily
Really a great outfit. Really a great outfit.
You know, it's amazing that none of these people caved in because they all blended together, and it just took maybe one of them to fall into the wrong way, and all his plans would have went to hell. So
Well, the cool thing is, not only didn't they get caught, but like when you're talking about Talmadge, they didn't even know he was the actual person because he used a code name until 1930.
really,
Yeah, when historians pulled that up and compared handwriting and different things that were in his papers that were also in the papers that they had.
just incredible how
Yeah.
this all played out. Really, just amazing.
Any other questions for Paulie or before Sean starts?
There's one other thing that I want to mention, and I think it was Madison was with Franklin over in Europe trying to solicit support and also negotiate with the British.
Yeah, he was part of the committee for secret correspondence. Yeah.
Well, Madison always reported back to the Americas that Franklin was a waste of time. He was always sleeping during the day because he stayed out all night, went to all these parties and socialized with these socialites and stuff. Madison's trying to do it through formal channels. In the meantime, Franklin is in the background, going to these parties, getting the intelligence, getting more information and intelligence to report back to the U.S. When Madison was bitching about Franklin, partying all night, in reality, he was out there doing some intelligence gathering. So Madison was trying to do the above road, Franklin was doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a great job of
Very
researching.
nice. Thank you.
A great job of researching. That's a lot of information there. That's
All right, thank you, Paulie. Now Sean.
All right, so mine is basically on the Culper spy ring. No, I'm good. I didn't make a slide. I did the little handout you guys can look at. He really upped the game with this PowerPoint slide stuff, I just didn't do
I
it.
was thinking that.
I also didn't use the right font, so this is kind of close for me to read. So, one thing to keep in mind in 1776 is we were up against the biggest power in the world. The British Navy controlled the seas, British regulars were highly trained, and they owned New York City at that point, and that was the center of their operations, was out of New York City. We had lost it at that point, and they dug a foothold in. George Washington, as Paulie covered some of this stuff, some was going to overlap. He realized quickly that he needed an organization that was going to give him information on troop strength, ship movement, supply routes, planned offensives, loyalist activity. And he had a very loose group at first before these organized groups came in. And one of the first ones was Nathan Hale. A little bit about him. Our family lore is that we're directly related to him somehow, but I've never seen evidence of that. So, well, my mom and my grandmother both told me that. So he was a young school teacher from Connecticut and a captain in the Connecticut Army. In 1776, when the British captured New York City, Washington desperately needed intelligence from the British lines. Hale volunteered for the dangerous mission. He lacked formal spy training, communication support, extraction plans, coded messaging systems. He was a 21-year-old kid who just wanted to go out there and do everything that he could. And it really showed the shortcomings that we had in the spy networks. He operated alone. He carried incriminating notes on his person. And like Paulie said, he was captured in British controlled territory. He was operating as a spy out of uniform, and he was sentenced to death. Before his execution, he declared, "I only regret that I have one life to give for my country." So Nathan Hale's death, and I'm sure there were other ones that had happened that didn't get publicized so much, kind of told Washington he needed something a little bit more organized, a little bit more covert. So one of the people that he reached out to, Benjamin Talmadge, and Benjamin Talmadge at that point, he was in the 2nd Continental Dragoons. And one of these that we did a few weeks back, talking about dragoons, the British dragoons, and our continental ones as well, they were like the special forces of the day. These are very smart, very capable people. He was a Continental Army officer from Setauket, Long Island. So he had gone to school with Nathan Hale. He went to Yale with him. So his death really, really hit home with him. The realization that we needed to be a little bit better. They needed to be able to gather intelligence from British-occupied New York, monitor troop movements, identify British operations, and protect Continental Army strategy. He came up with the coded messages, the aliases, the dead drops, the courier networks, intelligence verification, all baked at compartmentalization, all things that spy groups use now to this day, so that not one person, one of the spies in the network that he was going to create, would know who the other people were.
Including George Washington.
Yeah, including George Washington. He didn't even know the extent of the ring that was put together.
Who was his main contact? Who did he disseminate? Talmadge.
Talmadge, yeah. Talmadge was the main contact. So the main members of this, and I'll just cover a few of them on here. Abraham Woodhull. So his code name that he created was Samuel Culper Sr. Robert Townsend was Samuel Culper Jr. Anna Strong. She was married, her husband had a saloon or a pub, and she would hang out laundry in different order and in different colors that were almost signals, like they would use flag signals for signaling on ships, telling people that could observe at different times what was going on. Caleb Brewster, he was a primary courier. He used whale boats across Long Island Sound carrying intelligence back and forth while avoiding the British. Austin Rowe, a tavern owner and courier, transported messages between Manhattan and Setauket, and many more, but these are just a few of them. So we talked about the invisible link. Now we go into numerical codes. They used a numerical dictionary and several other codes and ciphers. One of the ciphers is on the very last page of the handout that I gave you. But the codes were like 711, that indicated George Washington. 727 was for New York, 745 was for England. And they would pepper these in their letters when they were trying to, they were going back and forth. And it could be a random letter written or something that was written in a sequence, as one of those letters kind of show you that's in there. Aliases, they never used their actual names. All right, so moving into life inside occupied New York City. The city was overcrowded, dangerous, full of loyalists, heavily patrolled, filled with spies and informants for all sides. And in that area is primarily where the Culper ring worked. They blended into daily life, they overheard conversations, observed troop activity, and then would transport that information out through either letters or over the waters. Couple major successes of the Culper ring. Counterfeit currency. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any gold stores. We didn't have any silver stores. Somebody okay? Oh, okay. So we were printing money. We were printing money like crazy. And the British figured, let's just copy the money and flood the market with it and start devaluing it. The start of that was uncovered by the Culper ring. They don't indicate which one of the spies uncovered it, but it made its way back to George Washington so they could make subtle changes in the currency so they know shopkeepers could know which is which. Troop movements. Washington was informed about British troop and naval movements. The French alliance, the network warned Washington about British awareness of the French military coordination. And Washington increasingly relied on Culper intelligence to reposition troops and surprise attacks. So we touched a little bit on Benedict Arnold, and I wanted to go a lot more into him. He was one of our greatest battlefield commanders. He fought heroically at Quebec, Lake Champlain, and Saratoga. But in the background, he was becoming financially ruined, politically resentful, bitter towards Congress, and angry about promotions. He kept getting rebuffed every chance he could, and he had a family that he had to take care of. His wife was Peggy Shipper. I think that was actually his second wife. She came from a loyalist family. She was connected to John Andre, who Paulie talked about, we'll go a little bit into as well. She was connected to him during the British occupation of Philadelphia. Her whole family were loyalists, and she's married to this general for the Continental Army, who's pissed off that he's not getting promoted and not getting enough money or recognition. In Saratoga, which was, we're going to cover that, right? Saratoga in depth. Saratoga, he was about to be relieved by Gates, and he wanted nothing to do with that. And he charged into battle and got shot in his left leg. And a little cool story about that is in Saratoga, there's something called the Boot Monument, and it has just the lower part of the leg and the boot on the monument, and it says one of the bravest Continental soldiers. Doesn't have his name on it or anything. But it's about him. And the way we looked at it is that leg is the only thing that didn't turn traitor later on. So it's kind of a jest on him. Let's see. All right, so in 1780, he opened negotiations with the British. He commanded West Point, and that controlled all of the Hudson River at that time. West Point is up above New York City. The British are all in New York City, so it was a strategic point that led into the northern regions where the British needed to be able to occupy. He offered to surrender the fortress to the British in return for money and a commission in the British Army. The way he got caught is, again, his wife knew John Andre and was talking to John Andre about her husband and how he just got promoted at West Point. And you know, a little bit of money and a little bit of recognition, and he might just give you the plans to that. John Andre, he was an educated, artistic, charismatic, respected on both sides, and he met with Arnold near West Point. Arnold provided maps, troop strengths, artillery positions, and defensive weaknesses. The British expected this intelligence would allow them to seize West Point. The Culper ring began noticing suspicious behavior, unusual attention in West Point, discussions involving a high-ranking American officer, and a secret British expectations of major success. So the word was getting out, and the spy network was listening. Robert Townsend overheard conversations suggesting a senior American officer was cooperating with the British. These reports reached Washington through Talmadge's intelligence network.
Actually, Sean, it went to Mercero first, then Mercero went to Ben Talmadge.
Well, that's what your group thinks. My group thinks they got the information first. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. You're correct. You're correct. So, the capture of John Andre. After meeting Arnold, Andre attempted to return to the British lines disguised as a civilian. Near Tarrytown, New York, 3 American militiamen stopped him: John Pauling, Isaac Van Wert, and David Williams. During the search, so they searched him, discovered hidden military documents inside Andre's booth. The papers contained detailed West Point defensive information. Benjamin Talmadge immediately realized the significance. He carried military plans, false identity papers, he traveled in civilian clothing, and intelligence reports had already warned of suspicious activity. He quickly connected the dots to Benedict Arnold at that point. So Arnold had escaped. At that, George Washington gets the message back on what's going on, and he heads to West Point. They're going to arrest Benedict Arnold. But Benedict Arnold, realizing he could see from the top that John Andre had already gotten caught, and he slips away. Arnold escaped aboard the British ship, the Vulture. George Washington reportedly reacted with shock and fury. Arnold became the most famous traitor in American history. And John Andre, he was executed as a spy. Kind of like they executed Nathaniel L. The legacy of the Culper spy ring. We covered the inventions, the covert communications, coded messaging, intelligence verification, compartmentalized and structured spy networks. Modern agencies, the CIA, rely on these same principles today. The revolution was not won only by soldiers in open battle, but by invisible ink, whispered conversations, hidden messages, and ordinary people willing to risk death in silence. It was just phenomenal what these people done. And the thing to keep in mind, just like the wives of the British general and of Benedict Arnold, is the loyalists and the patriots were all intermingled. They were all living in the same area, and everybody was working towards their own ends on it. We just had the stronger spy network that was able to get Washington the critical information that he needed at every time that he needed it for a battle. And we've covered a lot of them already, how he escaped from New York, how he sent out some false information on where he was going, when he went into New Jersey. Time and time again, the spy network just created the opportunity for him to deceive and win. And if he didn't win, it created him the opportunity to survive and keep his troops alive. So, yeah, Tony.
One comment, with all the, what could go wrong with the spy and espionage scheme they had going, it's amazing that we won. I mean, it worked. You know, there's so many things that could have gone wrong. I mean, if DraftKings gave it odds, they won in like 10 million or something.
Well, and that's the British were the same thing. I mean, they were the biggest. The sun never set on the British Empire. They were the biggest empire around, and we were just a scrappy group. There was no way they thought we were going to win this. I think King George was in shock when it actually happened.
I actually looked that up, Tony.
Yeah.
I looked up on ChatCBD. I looked up the odds of America winning the revolution before April of 1775, and it was 1 in 90-some thousand. So the Vegas, I asked them, what would the Vegas odds have been? For us
Who would
to
have
win?
made that bet? You would have put 50 cents on it.
Well, their British arrogance was probably their biggest downfall.
We talked before about British arrogance
Right.
and how it's been the downfall. We got me.
Quick thing, trivia question. Every state has one. Who's the state hero of New York?
Depends on what side of the political argument you're on.
No, it's actually official. Who's the official? Like the state bird? The state
Mario Cuomo?
You would think so. No, Nathan Hale.
Nathan Hale.
Who's
Yeah.
the state? Who's the guy for New York? I mean, for Connecticut.
Nathan Hale.
Nathan Hale. Yeah.
Really?
Surprising. So he's physically, as of back in 1985, they made it for Connecticut official, but he's always been the state
Well,
hero of New York.
that quote.
He was actually shot. He was actually killed in New York City.
Yeah.
So New York City claimed him, and he was part of the Connecticut regiment. So Connecticut claims him as well. So both have him as the state.
And the thing you could go into with that a little bit too is that quote. I mean, the historians debate whether he actually said that or not, but that's what was written down, and that became a rallying cry.
Who wrote it down?
He 21 years old. It went out in all the pamphlets. It went in the papers. All the local flyers that went out. It was a rallying cry for the Patriots.
Years doing that bunch of stuff with the electronics, Geek Squad and General Motors. I was a maintenance manager for General Motors, so kind of in communication systems and all kinds of stuff really for a long time. Here we're gonna kind of change it up a little bit. We're all kind of used to instant communications these days and how things go quickly, and back then things didn't go so quickly. Let's go back 250 years. What do we got? During the American Revolutionary War, communications was slow, risky, and awful, surprisingly creative. Without modern technology, people relied on a mix of physical delivery, coded message, and signals. That's kind of some of the stuff we've been into already. Mass communication at the time was primarily through handwritten letters. That's how most of the stuff was done. Printed pamphlets, you had the printers. Committees of correspondence, and we'll get into that a little bit. And I think you guys kind of got into that, secret societies, committees, and signal systems, which is another thing we kind of in the Culper spiral. Usually, delivery of letters were carried by couriers on horseback or ships, ensuring timely dissemination information. Oh, a little closer. And then news and messages spread by person to person. Obviously, how we do it in here. In 1776, sending a message from New York City to Boston usually took several days to about 2 weeks, depending on the method and conditions at the time. Typical times: a rider on horseback, 4 to 7 days, in good conditions. Regular post rider, They didn't have the Pony Express quite yet, but that was kind of basic what was going on at the time. Your stage route also 1 to 2 weeks, which is quite a long time. Military dispatch during the Revolutionary War could be delayed by weather, bad roads, if you had bridge patrols, or combat activity. The distance roughly 215 to 230 miles. By 18th century road was traveled was slow, roads were rough, dirt tracks, rivers sometimes would flood out things. You would require ferries, and night travel was very limited. You didn't have, you didn't have headlights to be able to go out. In the winter, the mud could get really slow your movement down. The Continental Congress and General Washington often waited days for critical wartime correspondence between major cities in the colonies. So you had your written letters, you had your printing presses, and that's kind of I believe this is a genuine one from about that time that they were using. And then you had your committees of correspondence, and you had your fast courier, which I got a little humorous ones here, but you had your guy, a lot of times the guy was running, you had your courier on horseback. Now, using a carriage, if you had sometimes actually with carriages, they would transport your gunpowder and things like that. Would be things that they would transport to hopefully not get caught. Your sailing ships took the longest routes usually, and took the longest, but you had your naval frigates, which were actually a little bit faster, and you could cut down the time.
Hey, Bob,
Yes.
maybe the dumbest question in here, but did they have to pay? Did you have to, how did you send something? Like, when you wanna always go over on the fastest route to send a letter or whatever, a person to person, do you know if they had to pay for that, or?
They did have a postal service, and actually Ben Franklin was part of the British Postal Service. He started the postal service here in America, and he was actually fundamental in the colonies of having the original British Postal Service. Yes, and you would pay. I don't know what the amount of money that you would have to pay for a letter to go to London, but I imagine it was, similar to what we would pay today to have overseas mail. Then you had your word of mouth. A lot of these things happened in churches. You would have you after church, you would talk to people in taverns and bars. Same committees and societies that you would meet there also. Probably one of the biggest places you would meet people would be in bars, I imagine, at the time, and cigar clubs. They had cigar clubs. And then we were talking about symbols and signals. These were common symbols that you would use on your ships and stuff, and to send messages. I don't know if this is the exact same alphabet they would use, but it was something similar to this. And then you also had at night, you would be able to send signals by having the amount of lights or lanterns. We know that Paul Revere stuff, right? That's all kind of common. In fact, one of the interesting things about signals were, well, I get to it in the next slide, was where they were used. In colonial times, various signal systems included drums, which all the old drums, that's why they always had drums to keep everybody in marching distance and everything like that. And you had banners, communications on the battlefield, as well as visual signal methods like flags and torches, developed by the U.S. Signal Corps during the Civil War. But these are kind of came from originally in the Revolutionary War. Your flags were waved in patterns. If they would put like up and down would mean something, sideways would mean something, a trend at an angle would mean something. So that's how you would, at the time, sending messages across the battlefield was you know, you didn't have a two-way radio, so it was a little difficult. Wigwag, they call that wigwagging with your flags. Flags allowed for communication, making them essential for battlefield coordination. And at night, you would use your lanterns. You would one lantern up and you maybe go to the side. It would mean something to move the troops forward or move the troops backwards. They had to develop things like that at night. So it was, you know, very essential that you would be able to see those. Key features of signal systems. These signal systems played a vital role in the effectiveness of military communications during the colonial era, enabling quick and efficient communications across vast distances. Your visibility, you would need at night, especially high visibility. If you had something up high up on the mountain, you'd be able to see that. Flags, moderate, depended on size and color to be able to see. Alerts for troops about, you know, troops are coming, put it up twice and put two lanterns up or something. They always had these little symbols and be able to do that with, that was one of the major ways of communicating. One of the major things that they said, I did this research and I was really kind of surprised, was Old Fort Niagara was one of the major ones where they used signals at night. They had people up and down the coast, and they would signal to their fort at Niagara that British were coming or things were, you know, whatever was going on, they would have a symbol for that. And the Fort Niagara was listed along with the Fort Merrimack in Michigan. I think that's in Michigan. Those were the two that were quite using signal flags and lanterns and stuff. They were predominant in the research I did of using signal systems. So that was something interesting I found out local. How long did messages get from one place to the other? Okay, from Virginia to Boston in the colonies during the American Revolutionary War, they moved faster than transatlantic mail. We do that, but still wasn't quick by modern standards. Now, from Virginia to Boston is roughly 500 to 600 miles, and depending on the exact starting port, your fast courier 5 to 10 days. Now that's quite a long time to get dispatches and military information. You know, I don't know. By the time you get your information, it would be, oh, what's the question?
When a courier was given a message,
Yeah.
did he deliver the message himself or was it passed on?
Sometimes it was passed on, sometimes, and they had to be careful because they could be detected. You know, if you were carrying a military dispatch or something like that, you didn't want people to know. And people would be, you know, found out. So you would want to trade it off after so many miles, like, they would have, it's kind of like the Pony Express where they would have one horseman with a message and he would give it to the next horseman. This was very, very common. It's kind of the Pony Express came from that, you know, kind of things happening during the Revolutionary War. A lot of things happen, you know, and then they go on to be something different later on. So a normal courier, you know, 5 to 10 days. Now, that might be one person, or it could be 2 people or 3 people with the intended.
Because if it's more than one person, there has to be, you have to know who you're giving it to, and that person has to know who you're giving it to.
Right, you would have to know that who you're going to, otherwise you don't want to give it to a British officer or somebody, and then, you know, your guys would be.
Right. Gotta make sure the guy you're giving it to has half a brain and can relay the right message.
Yeah. Well,
We talked about that with Lexington and Concord, how many of the towns already had pre-established communication. And so I think what you're getting at is, you know, this was a lot more complicated than we think. These were pre-established network points, and I guess, you know, certain people had jobs. Her job in this town was to be Schreiber or whatever.
yeah, Joe would give it off to Sam, and Sam would get off to Pete, or, you know, you would know who your next person you would give the information to. Normal conditions, 1 to 2 weeks. Now, again, that's a long time for a military military dispatch. Things could happen, you know, in the meantime. I think that was one of the advantages that the Americans had, actually, because it took so much longer to send a message overseas and get back, where here in America, you could get the messages back and forth with the colonials a lot easier and a lot faster. Couriers usually rode on horseback, switching horses again, like the Pony Express. That's one of the things that kind of came out of this. But the main roads, were pretty rough. Poor conditions, especially in the winter. I can't imagine on a dirt trail in the winter and trying to get a message across somewhere bad. River crossings, you had to be careful for British patrols and checkpoints. Determined rider carrying urgent news like found the battles at Lexington and Concord could move surprisingly fast. Riders spreading news from Massachusetts reached as far as the southern counties in a matter of days to weeks. So you always had to be careful though, because either side, British or American patrols, if you're British, carrying a courier, you might be stopped by American patrols and vice versa. That might stop and delay couriers for a while. It wasn't instant communication. It did, communication between places like Virginia and Boston was also fast enough to coordinate major military political actions.
Do you know how many of these correspondence might have got intercepted where they never were delivered?
There were quite a few. I didn't. That would be, a lot more. I had, in fact, I got a lot of research that I did, pages and pages here, but sometimes I had to leave stuff out for the sake of break.
Hey Bob, I think when you're talking about this and you're talking about messages, I think when you were doing your research, was there a difference between military correspondence and just regular correspondence? Like someone sent, they have an aunt in Virginia and they live in Massachusetts. Was there a network for that, or?
It was pretty much the same network. Basically, you're using the same people. Military ones were probably restricted people that they knew they could trust.
Well, every town and every colony had committees, correspondence, and they were all patriots. They were patriot guys that established that network. That's part of what Paul Revere established very early on, right? And their objective was to carry correspondence between the towns and between the colonies. So I guarantee you that a lot of these messages were carried by committees, the couriers from the committees of correspondence.
So if you wanted to send a letter to your uncle?
No, it wasn't for that. It was for the committees of
That's what I'm
correspondence.
getting at.
The committees of correspondence were for the
For the war,
for the military issue
only.
Right. Your military stuff would be trusted.
political.
I was just curious, what was it before the, how did people communicate by letter?
Basically, it's the same way, but it would take longer. For the military
Well,
times,
some of the same people that were couriers for regular stuff were also in the committees of correspondence. That's why Paul Revere had connections with a lot of those people. That's why he was the right guy to put a lot of that together. He wasn't the only one, but he was the right guy to do that. And the guys the printers also, because they used the courier network to deliver the broadsides and all that, and newspapers and stuff like that. And not all of those couriers, but some of those couriers were patriots and part of the committees of correspondence. Paul Revere himself was actually a courier for the committee of correspondence. He wasn't involved in a lot of this because he was in Boston. And a lot of this spying activity was really focused on New York because that's where the British were.
there was a question earlier about people ever being captured. And yes, although I don't have names here, captured messengers were often questioned for information if they were carrying military intelligence, they were jailed as spies. In harsher cases, they were hung. And if they were caught behind, enemy line, they would face automatic, immediate execution. Messages would be seized. They could be read immediately. They could expose troop movements, plans, or alliances. That's why armies tried to keep messages brief and vague and encoded. And uses of, you guys went into invisible ink, so a lot of these messages would look like a normal letter, but they would have the invisible ink, and then you'd have to put them under a candle or a heat source, and they would reveal the rest of the messages. But sometimes they did send a courier out with false or misleading information or decoy messages, and if these were intercepted, they could mislead the enemy, and hopefully the enemy would, make the wrong move instead of making the best move. And they were trusted couriers for military messages, where before they would just be a regular messenger, a mailman, we consider a mailman, but these guys would be trusted. You would know that they would be quickly get the messages quick, and again, there were severe consequences if you were caught as a spy.
A lot of the messages were actually written in articles in the broadsides in the newspapers. Obviously coded, but it was right out in the open. I didn't really look heavily into it, but as I understand it, if you look back at those newspapers, they're riddled with coded messages around the patriot effort in the war.
Also, I just read about what it cost. And if you were sending a letter, there were couriers that went back and forth to towns and then would hand off the letter. It would usually cost you like 4 to 6 cents, but you didn't pay it. It was the receiver that paid it.
Oh, really?
And if they didn't give the courier any money, they didn't get their letter.
We should do that now.
Yeah, exactly.
Things like jail.
Cash on delivery.
Yeah.
To give you guys a little idea, I put a kind of a little map up here. You can, Boston, New York, 200 to 230, 2 to 4 days normally, or for a fast message, and normally for a courier usually, but a normal message like you would say mail would be 4 to 7 days. Boston for Virginia, 500 to 600 miles, 5 to 10 days at the best. That would be somebody riding multiple horses, like the Pony Express thing. But no, a normal delivery would be 1 or 2 weeks.
How much quicker a day?
Yeah. Now, the messages from the counties, this is what I said, that I believe our advantage was a ship carrying mail usually took 3 to 6 weeks to cross the Atlantic. And remember, with the trade winds, the messages go faster to England, but they come back slower because the trade winds are against us on the way back. So depending on the weather, and the fast ships like the frigates, they usually sailed a little quicker. They could do 3 to 4 weeks, but the lakes were common with the weather. If you ran into I can't imagine. We got weather now. We get the weather maps, and how would you know if you ran into a hurricane or something like that? I'm sure a lot of ships are lost. So round trip and message reply when you factor in the time delivered, the time delivered to a port, waiting on the ship to depart or landed, you're talking 2 to 4 months. 2 to 4 months to get a message. I send them, oh, we defeated, it's here, and then we get a message back 4 months later, or 3 months later. So again, storms are bad weather. Again, slowing ships down. Enemy naval activity. If you ran into a British frigate and you were an American ship or something, you could easily be sunk or captured. And sometimes ships would have to wait in port to get supplies and stuff like that. So all these things have made it a lot difficult to get a message to the king and back. So I believe that gave us a little bit of an advantage in communications. Leaders like King George, with the laymen, they had to make major decisions without knowing what was going on. I mean, you didn't know who's going, who's ahead, where are they, and what's going on. So by the time the situation, you got, oh, send them back and let's go here. It could be an entirely different situation on the ground. So here's where the major trade routes of the time. So a direct right to Boston to England, 3 to 6 weeks one way, and normal 4 to 5 weeks round trip again, 2 to 4 months. And you can see some of the other routes that some of the supplies and tobacco would go one way, and the manufactured products would go the other. But again, it would talk 2 to 4 months, 2 months to get there, and then two months to get back. So shipping, that was in the 1750s. So that kind of gives an idea, a general idea of what was going on and how long it took to get messages back and forth. One thing that I did find interesting was during that, we were talking about Tories and that from 1754 to 1783, that period witnessed a political revolution, but one in communications as well. In 1754, most inhabitants of the British North America thought of themselves as Britons. They, Britain. But they would also identify themselves as residents of Virginia, New York, Rhode Island, and by 1783, even though local identity was still important, they almost all thought of themselves as Americans. So, any questions or comments on that?
All right, thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
There's a liberty tree.
I looked up real quick, just 30 seconds. Declaration of Independence approved July 4th. Imagine you're declaring independence from the most powerful empire on earth, and they don't know for 2 months. Took almost 8 weeks for King George to find that out. Battle of Lexington and Concord fought April 19th, 1775. 6 weeks. They didn't know until early June. So Parliament's making decisions based off that, not realizing that we had Boston under siege at that point, right prior to Bunker Hill. Battle of Yorktown. Siege, October 19th, 1781. News reached London November 25th. 5 weeks later, the Prime Minister, Frederick North, reportedly reacted with despair. Oh God, it is all over. Now it happened 5 weeks earlier. So those are some fun little things for how that happened.
Well, if you go back to the battle, what was it, the War of 1812, the war had ended before the Battle of New Orleans, if I remember correctly. So we had already won, but the British were still fighting us, which we won that fight anyway.
Okay, John, you have any last words?
Yeah.
Next, wait, 6 days from today, I think, right? Next Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Uh-oh, the Sabres winning.
No, they'll play on Monday.
Yeah.
The Sabres go
Is
all
that
the way.
game 7 Monday?
Yeah, if they win Wednesday.
Monday.
No,
No.
they'll win 2. They don't get a game Monday.
So we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. All right, very, very important. You're doing that, right?
No, Tuesday is
Brandywine?
Brandywine, that's Jacob.
Jacob?
Is he here today?